Today I have Michael E. Stern with me from Pasadena, California to talk about his commercial time-lapse photography business. Michael first picked up a camera at age 12 and has yet to put one down. He is self-taught by way of a homemade darkroom and continued his photography education in junior and senior high schools, Cal State Northridge and Art Center College of Design, earning a BFA in 1979. During his career, Michael has owned and operated small, medium and large commercial studios in Hollywood, North Hollywood and Burbank. He began his career shooting movie posters for agencies and multimedia productions for Star-Kissed Foods. After relocating to Burbank, he began producing photographs for local and international companies specializing in van conversions, building design and construction. Michael started working with the Walt Disney Company in 1982 and continued to do so for over 20 years. He's also worked with Warner Brothers, Universal, Paramount Studios and Sid and Marty Krofft Pictures. He has taught at many educational institutions, teaching photographic theory, Photoshop, pre-press, artist business practices, and operating a sole proprietorship. His first book, Build a Better Photograph, A Disciplined Approach to Creativity, is an informative look at his approach to maintaining a professional photography presence beyond f-stops and shutter speeds. These days, he spends a lot of his time working on lengthy and detailed commercial time-lapse projects, which is our subject for today. So hi, Michael. It's really great to have you on here with me today.
Well, thank you, Nigel. It's a pleasure to be asked to provide some insights, and I'm happy to help out. Good to be here.
Always great talking with you. And today we're going to be fast-forwarding time a bit in this episode, since we'll be talking about Michael's very successful commercial time-lapse photography, something that we haven't really talked about before. And I'm really excited about that. So what was the main thing that first inspired you to start working with time-lapse photos?
I hate to say it, but it was a trip to Disneyland as a kid. On Main Street, there was a theater, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, and in the lobby of this presentation theater was a time-lapse called Disneyland Being Built in a Year and a Day, and it was a time-lapse of the Sleeping Beauty's castle on Main Street being built. And I remember waiting to go in to see the show, watching in this little viewing window my first time-lapse. It was 16-millimeter color film. It was one frame a day for 366 days, and it was the building of the castle. And I'd never seen anything like it ever, and it's always stuck in my mind. And in fact, I went to Disneyland this past summer with one of my cousins who was visiting from back east, and I went there to watch it again, and they'd moved it to a different part of the park. And I didn't get a chance to go and see it again, but they still play it there. And it was one of those seminal moments in your life, and you just never forget it.
I can imagine. I mean, those things really have a lasting impact on us that we may not realize until one day we think, man, you know what? That's what it was. That's what got me inspired about this all that time ago.
Well, I wasn't thinking about doing it for a living or anything like what, I'm doing now. But as you say, it always just sort of hung out there in the ether and was just part of my experience. And finally, I was able to grab a hold of it and apply those feelings and make a business out of it.
In many ways, Disney's had quite an impact on your whole sort of business life altogether, really.
Yes, they were a house account at my studio for about 20 years. It took me 2 years of calling on the phone and going to see people to finally get work from them. That was back in '82, was my first piece of business from them. And I worked pretty steady worked pretty steady for about 20 years. And the last job I did for them was in 2011. And, and after, like most relationships, they wax and wane. And after all this time, we decided to break up and go steady with somebody else. It was a great experience, really enjoyed it. But, sometimes it's just time to move on.
So your new going steady partner is time-lapse photography for commercial purposes. And the technical aspects, they seem to me like they must be in a league of their own, really, when compared to conventional photography or even traditional videography, which is, obviously moving pictures. But time-lapse is something altogether different. What were some of the biggest challenges that you came across when you started out in this field?
Well, the things that were unknown, and then when you know what you don't know, they can become overwhelming to try and know them. It's the timing between exposures, the interval, how often you take pictures is really driven by the event or what it is you're photographing. How long it lasts really drives how often you take pictures. And then the next thing would be the frames per second for output. Do you output it at 12 frames a second, 24, 30, 60, 50, etc.? And then the timing between clips, once you get all of your photographs that you've shot into your editing timeline, they don't necessarily have to run at the same pace. And so working with the pacing of individual clips and how they interact with the clip that came before it and the clip that comes after it. And then finally, the codec, the compression, decompression algorithms that are used for various outputs. You're going to play on a smartphone or a tablet is not the same compression that you may want to use where the piece you're shooting is going to go into a bigger film. So these technical things, the intervals, the frame rate, the timing between clips, and then the compression, decompression, or codec, those technical things were really difficult to grasp. And only after doing it, enough content, do you figure out how to integrate all of those.
So basically, if you find yourself faced with a project that, is maybe going to span, let's say, 3 months of real time, you need to take into consideration what is going to be the expected length of the finished video, and then figure out how often do you need to shoot a photograph in order to create enough frames to fill that space. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That is the theory, but that is not the practice.
Okay.
And it's one of these things, it's a real interesting mix of art and science. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And that means that I tend to overshoot. And I also don't think so much about how long is the finished piece going to be, because I don't really know how long it could be, because I'm not just shooting with one camera in a fixed position for that 3-month time. I'm going out there sometimes on a daily basis with what I call daily rover units, and I'll put out 3 or 4 additional cameras at different spots on a construction site, let's say, to grab different points of view. Or even if it's a one-day event, I'm shooting multiple cameras and I'm getting a lot of content, and I'm shooting maybe once every 5 seconds, once every 30 seconds, once every 60 seconds, once every 3 minutes. It really depends. And I'm just really trying to grind out and get as much content as I possibly can. And then editing all of that is the process of removal. How little can I include and still drive the story, still flesh out the narrative? And if I can get it done in under 3 minutes, I'm golden. If it gets out to 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes, there better be a really good reason why it's that long. Because watching a time lapse can be a little bit like watching paint dry, but not as interesting. And you really have to make the story go fast. Everything's got to move quickly. You're zooming in, you're zooming out, you're panning left or right, up or down. The frame, the camera's moving. Even if the camera isn't moving when you made the photographs, you're making the camera move in post. And you want it to be fluid. And there's a reason that the average length of a movie trailer is 2.5 minutes. And that's because of the attention span issues. And time-lapse, it'd be great if I could fit all of my time-lapse into that neat little 2.5-minute package, but sometimes they're 3.5 minutes. Personally, I think anything under 4 minutes is workable if it's good content. Mm-hmm. I have friends who vehemently disagree with me, and it better be 2.5 minutes or less, or you're just going to be asking way too much of people to watch. So there are no rules, really. These are just the variables that we have to take into account.
A question about the types of projects that you get and how they sort of originate, actually. They're commercial projects, so I'm assuming that you are working for somebody, a business, to get that thing done.
Yes.
But what do they typically use the end result for? Why do they need it?
In some cases, it's for community outreach. Sometimes they need to show their funders where the money is being spent, how the money is being spent, to enforce contractual deadlines. The company may have a strong and rich history of archiving and creating educational materials, and so they want this to document the history of the company or the history of the project. So there are a lot of reasons. I'm working on a project right now in Long Beach, California, and it's going to run about another 4 years, and they're replacing a major bridge that's been in use for 75 years, and it's too small. And the Port of Long Beach wants to provide information to the citizens and the inhabitants of Long Beach. Here's why your traffic is being tied up. Here's why there are freeway closures. Here are the good things that this new bridge is going to bring. Here are the jobs it's creating. So they're using what I'm time-lapsing for them really for their community outreach. So they have a very specific goal.
That's good to know, because it seems like a lot of these time-lapse videos that I see out there are just, they're cool to watch, but I didn't really understand a lot of the commercial applications of that.
It's a funny thing. I don't do a lot of flashy work. I don't do pretty sunsets and, fog rolling in off the ocean. Those eye candy time-lapse videos are great, and I like watching them too, but they're like a broken pencil. They have no point. I am telling a story. Mostly it's construction, and in all construction, there's a beginning, middle, and end to the process, and that's just like a story. And as a commercial photographer, I'm always trying to tell stories with my photographs. So my purpose in doing time-lapse is pretty much built in to the directive from the client or the organization. And can I do those pretty time lapses? Absolutely. But they get a lot of hits sometimes, and they're pretty to watch, but maybe part of them could be incorporated into a bigger time-lapse film. But I'm really grinding out for-profit short time-lapse films where I have a directive or an end goal by the client, and then they pretty much hand off everything else to me. Once we decide on a budget and what some of the other parameters may be that are important to them, then I just pretty much turn and burn. And I'm always thinking about, how is the story going to be told by placing a camera here? Or how am I going to communicate what's going on through time-lapse in the next 3 weeks? I'm constantly asking those kinds of questions because, as you said a moment ago, I have a commercial purpose for the work I'm doing. It's not just eye candy, although I want it to be pretty, that's for sure.
Because I know that there's probably people out there who look at doing time-lapse photography simply because it's cool and different, rather than using it for the purpose that you described. So what's the process like of planning a major time-lapse project? I mean, how do you visualize in your mind what the end result is going to look like?
Let's just stay with the construction portion of time-lapse. All construction jobs start the same way for the most part. It's dirt on the ground. And then they excavate and they build the infrastructure in the ground with electrical conduit and sewer lines and water lines, et cetera. And then they cover that up, and then they build on top of that until the building is complete. So you know what the end result's going to be, a completed structure. So then it's a question of getting the look-aheads from the project management team. On this month we're going to be grading. This month steel goes in the ground and we pour the foundation. During this month we're going to put up walls and the roof, and the last month we're going to be doing all the finishing and the inspection. So you get from the construction people the timeline of what's going to happen. In the case of an event, and that may be 3 months or 10 months or a year or whatever. In the case of an event, it may be 2 days, but you still get a schedule. We set up on this day, we pre-light and we test during these hours. The following morning, the gates open, the people come in, the event happens during these hours, it ends by this hour, and we break down the next morning. Whatever the schedule may be, you're still getting a beginning, middle, and end. So you understand where it starts and where it ends, and then my process is to fill in that middle gap of documenting that process of setting up, doing it, and breaking down. And then what I have to take into account are the client goals, the nature of the activity, the accessibility of the site in terms of where I can or where I would like to place my cameras. Am I going to run my cameras off battery, solar, or AC? The safety considerations. Is anyone going to get hurt possibly by my gear? Or the security considerations. Is it going to get stolen or damaged? Does the client have a desired outcome? Do they have a projected length of time of the deliverable? Am I going to add sound effects and music, create titles? How close is this location to my office? So, how often I service the cameras? How long will it take me to get there and come back? Can I remotely monitor the cameras? I've got to collaborate with all of the people on the ground, the construction people, the construction workers, the management people. They all have to buy into what I'm doing, or it's going to be a struggle for me to get what I would need to have done. Or in the case of an event, am I getting my media credentials and my site pass so I can go wherever I need to go? What is the licensing agreement between us? I have to take that into consideration. And there's also a premium for my particular vision, my particular taste, my particular experience. And as a person who works for himself, if I don't put a premium on what I do, the client is not going to put a premium on what I do. And that's also part of the sales and marketing process. They've got to buy into what I'm going to do. I'm not just a time-lapse guy. This is a Michael E. Stern time-lapse production. And there's a premium for that because I'm doing the work. And so all of that gets factored in.
So it sounds like it is even quite a detailed process, just even providing a cost estimate for one of these jobs.
Yeah, it's tough. It's you can't phone it in. You have to be present. And there are a lot of little things that you have to think about, because every little thing that I think about that I do is going to add time. And of course, time is money. But, at the same time, this is passion work. If there's anything I've ever done in my life regarding photography and passion, this is it. For every hour that I'm getting paid to do something, I'm probably putting in another 2 to 5 hours of additional work, whether I'm thinking about something or re-rendering a clip or going to school to learn some technique to use in post-production or cutting it a different way. There's the client's version and there's the director's cut. I'm adding more content or taking more content out. This is passion work. You cannot say, okay, the budget is $25,000 and the construction is 3 months. I'll deliver in 2 months, and that's all I'm going to put in. If you can make that work and live by the work, then, that's great. Go for it. But this is you want the viewer to have an emotional experience if you can. I realize it's construction work for the most part, but that doesn't mean you can't make it interesting. And that's my job, is to try to make it interesting so you'll want to see it more than once. And if that means I got to put in more time until I get it just right, then that's what I do. And I really don't worry about the money.
Is it a tough thing to sell to people, to companies perhaps who have never used time-lapse before, from the perspective that they look at it and go, well, at the end of the day, we get a 3-minute video and here's what you want to charge for it? There seems to be a somewhat disparity between those two.
Yeah, I just did a dog and pony show last week for a finance person who really didn't understand time-lapse, but thought that he did. And after my presentation, he slapped himself on the head so many times I thought he was going to give himself a concussion. I get it now. I get it. This was A+. Now I understand it. He wants me to come back the end of this month and do another dog and pony show for a lot more people who all have the authority to buy from me because they think it's a lot less complex than it is. I did a keynote presentation and I put clips in from time-lapse films that I've done that address certain concepts. But, I explain what is time-lapse, when did it begin, and why is it appropriate, why might you need it. Here are some of the camera moves. It's more than just putting a camera, on the side of a light pole and coming back in 6 months. And I really went to great lengths to explain it in a very simple way. But then I also said that you're paying for 3 separate and distinct processes: the pre-production, location scouting, where does the camera go, how many cameras, etc. And then the photography is the actual production. The cameras are running, you're taking files off the card on a weekly basis, or you're remotely downloading, whatever you might do. And that's a pretty simple part. The photography is pretty basic. And then the last part is the post-production. You're uploading the files to your archive, you're cataloging the files, you're editing them, you're cropping, you're toning, you're adding color, you're getting sound effects, you're getting music, you're getting the titles, you're editing everything together, you're warp stabilizing jittery footage, you're doing fades and you're doing dissolves, and you're basically, most of your money is being spent in the post-production. That's where you breathe life into the production. And that's what I got across to them, that you can't think of it as, I paid $30,000 and all I got was this thing that's 3 minutes long. You can't relate to that, but that's what they related to. So my job is to separate those two things and show that there is a connection. But, it's incumbent upon me to explain to them that the cameras are running for 5 months. I have 5 cameras out there. Each one's doing 300 pictures a day. Let's do the math. That's a lot of pictures. Those pictures have to be housed somewhere, and those pictures have to be looked at and put into sequences, and then decide which of those sequences make the most sense to put into a film, and then what is the order that they get put into the film. It doesn't always have to be chronological. And once you explain that to them, it's a little bit easier for them to grasp, but it's still, you want to make the presentation to the people that make the decision. You don't want it to be, anybody lower level that doesn't control the money, because they'll just say to their boss, yeah, the guy's great, it's going to be $30,000. They'll go, no, find somebody cheaper. You want to get away from that. So I'm at a level, fortunately, where I deal with decision makers. I don't deal with people down the food chain. And you've got to insist on presenting to decision makers. Otherwise, you're really going to have a hard time getting across why these things cost what they cost. 5 months of photography, and it's 5 months of post-production. So what I'm doing, I'm going to be working for 10 months. So $40,000 divided by 10 months is $1,000 a week. That's not really a lot of money. So you've got to think about it in those terms as the provider. When you're explaining it to the client, you got to hold your ground.
It can't be just as simple as saying, okay, we've got X thousand images to create a sequence here. We'll just stitch them all together into a movie. You mentioned that they have to be looked at. I'm sure that there are occasions where something, like a person stands in front of the camera or something, or something goes wrong and it's just the sequence, isn't quite right in that particular point. What do you do about all that?
I use Lightroom as my database. So the files come in when they're imported into Lightroom, and they're automatically put into dated folders. So I will look at the first picture of that folder and the last picture in that folder just to see if there's anything significant that's changed in the scene. And then I'll quickly, in the library module, scroll through the thumbnails, and they'll play on the preview screen like a little time lapse. And I can see, there was a lot of activity going on right over here, right after 12 and before they quit. So I can use the last part of this day, and I'll probably do a push-in and get to that stuff. Because I did have a camera going on the other side of the site, and as I push in, I could cut over to that other camera. So this is a good day to use. I do that a lot. If I'm running a sequence and there's 1 or 2 shots where, let's say, somebody in a bright colored, all these guys on a job site wear orange vests, and sometimes I will tone down the color orange in post, and sometimes I won't. It just depends. But if all of a sudden one of them's walked in front of the camera, or they parked a backhoe in front of the camera for 5 minutes and there's 3 or 4 frames of the backhoes there, I'll go in and delete those individual frames. And that takes a lot of time. Oh, geez, no one's going to care. Just that's a time lapse. It runs through. It's quick. Nobody will know.
Yeah, right.
Well, yes, they will know. And what will happen is the time lapse will run, and all of a sudden they'll be like subliminal. There'll just be a blip of what was that? What was that? And that can be distracting. I don't want you ever to look at my work and go, what was that? What was that? then that takes you out of watching the story. And part of what I'm being paid to do is to make sure that doesn't happen. And that takes a lot of time. And I don't mind putting the time into it. It goes with the territory, but it's also why I can get what I feel is a premium for my work. I talk to some of my colleagues, and they're somewhat surprised at the kind of money I get. But it's all relative. I know companies. In fact, I talked with a possible client today about a project that's going to run for 4 years. And when he penciled out the map, it was going to be about $300,000. And one of my competitors talked to him last week, and when he penciled it out, it was $750,000. So compared to this guy, I'm a bargain. But compared to somebody who will say, I'll do the whole job for $50,000, God love him, give it to him for 50 grand. He'll kill himself, and he'll be broke by the time he's done. So, it's all relative, and you have to really know what your worth is. And, so you can't say I'm expensive or I'm cheap. You got to look at it on a per project basis. And I don't really worry about the competition. I worry about, am I getting a square deal, and am I going to give a square deal? And then I can go forward.
From a creative standpoint, who do you think has the most influence over what the end result looks like? Is that going to be you or the client, or is it more of a compromise or a collaboration?
Well, for me, knock on wood, I'm very lucky. I have clients who let me come up with the vision. And I tell clients that I'm working with now and potential clients, the best way to work with me is to give me as much responsibility as possible and then let me deliver something to you. And when you say creative, it's really, the construction project or an event occurs, and the creativity, where does the camera go? How high up off the ground is the camera? What is the focal length of the lens? These are all things that we typically do as still photographers that the client doesn't really get that involved with. So the creativity really comes into the post-production side of things. Are we going to render this black and white or color? Are we going to have it muted colors or rich and vibrant colors? Are we going to make it a hybrid of black and white and color? Are we going to make it very, very fast like an old Keystone Cops movie? Or are we going to make it a little more laborious and languid and slower paced? Those are some of the decisions that the client can collaborate with. And, I'm happy to take in what they have to say. But I also, for the most part, have a pretty strong vision going in. And they come to me for that very reason. They're for the most part, relying on me to help solve that creative aspect for them.
So for anyone thinking of entering this field, what would be your top 3 most important pieces of advice that you could offer them?
Don't, and don't.
Well, let's assume that they ignore that particular advice and do it anyway.
Just when I think I'm getting a handle on some of the technology, I'll see some new technique in the groups I belong to, either on Facebook, or there's a group called Hyperlapse, and on LinkedIn there's a Time-Lapse photography group. Just when I think I'm getting a handle on something, I'll see something someone's done, and I'm just like, okay, there's no hope for me. It's way beyond what they just did. Is so cool, and I've never even thought of that. How did they get to that spot? So more than any other time I've been in the business, the technology is changing, and what people are doing out there in the field is incredible. And it does make me feel insignificant a lot, but at the same time, I'm solving a problem for a client, and I have clients who feel hopeful that I'm going to help them. And to get into this business, you have to understand that you are going to be running all the time to keep up with the technology. I have invested tens of thousands of dollars of profits over the last couple of years in cameras and intervalometers and going to classes to learn software and tripods and custom brackets and solar energy. You can't rent you can rent this stuff, but it's so difficult to, you got to fill out the forms, and you're renting it by the day or the week. Your project is a long term. That can be very costly. I'm self-contained. I have the resources to take on projects and devote myself to them. It takes money to make money. And you have to go out and shoot. I gave a dog and pony show last week, and I wanted to have a specific type of time-lapse example in this presentation because I knew this presentation was coming up. And back in July, I got an opportunity to shoot an event. I wasn't getting paid for it. It was strictly a portfolio piece. So I knew there was a hole in my portfolio of event time-lapse work. I found an event that I wanted to photograph. I got in touch with the people. I did the event, and now it's in my portfolio. I was able to use it in this presentation, and it had the desired effect. He went, "Oh, that's cool. I get that. We have something like that too." That's what I wanted them to get to. So you have to think ahead, know where the holes are in your portfolio, and go out and produce the work and make sure it is your very best effort every time. You can't, no one's going to notice, I'm going to leave it in. The moment you start saying that, in my opinion, I think you're done. The person who doesn't take that attitude is going to move ahead of you. I'm 58 years old. I've been doing this over 30 years, and I put myself back in school in the spring to learn the After Effects software program because that is Photoshop for video. You just can't stop learning. You have to be self-contained, and you have to push yourself to do the very best work, even on the simplest, most benign, mundane subject matter. And you can't give up. It's the same as any other aspect of the business. You have to have the temerity to pull it off, the belief in yourself. You got to know you're going down a rabbit hole that has many different and exciting and overwhelming parts, and you just have to venture forth. Otherwise, why get out of bed? It's a tough mental game, and you have to be really, really hard on yourself. You have to support yourself and know that this is worth doing. And there's no guarantees. After all of that said, there's no guarantees. I can stop working tomorrow. You just never know. But I never, ever, ever, ever give up.
I guess there's few things in life that really do come with a guarantee. But that's great advice. Thank you, Michael. So one last question before we finish up. Do you have a personal dream project, one that you feel like would be a really good personal achievement for you?
I don't really. I know this is going to sound cliche, but my client work are my dream projects because they allow me to afford the lifestyle I desire for my wife, my son, and myself. I know it sounds a little bit corny, but when you're what I call an SECP, a self-employed creative professional, it's important to love every project you take on because being an SECP, I have the option of accepting or declining the work, and that is a dream for me.
Very well put. It doesn't sound corny at all. You've already said earlier on that you have a great passion for what you do. You love this work. You put a lot more time and effort into it than many other people might, if it was, say, a regular sort of paying job, I suppose. So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying in the sense that every project that you do is a dream project because it's been chosen specifically by you.
And it allows me to live my life on my terms. Life doesn't hand me what it's going to give me. I go out and get what I want. And being successfully self-employed allows me to have that mindset. And so every job that comes in is a dream project because it helps me towards that goal. And I really believe that. And it would work, even if I was a self-employed auto mechanic, I'd feel the same way. Every person that believes that I can help them, that's a dream job. And that mental aspect is something that constantly has to be nurtured as well and taken care of because, as you well know, it's very easy to get into a funk.
You said something in there that I think is really a key thing that a lot of photographers these days sadly are forgetting. And that is that you go out for what you want. You believe in yourself. You don't let the circumstances of the photography industry hold you to ransom, which a lot of people seem to be doing these days. We could go on for hours on that topic, but I hear a lot of this, we're all victims of a declining industry and all this kind of thing. You're living proof that is not the case, or it doesn't have to be the case if you follow what you want to do and you do it with passion.
And you have to be smart about how you go about it. And a lot of the people that complain are not tough enough. They don't love themselves enough to push them through these very tough times. They think they are, but they're not. And sometimes things are out of your control, and that certainly happens. But when you make money in this business, you put some of it away for a rainy day. That's a tried and true truism, I guess. And when times were very, very good for me, money went in the bank, and it affords me a certain lifestyle today. I've been doing this for over 30 years, as I said. You don't spend everything you get. You put money away and invest it, and at some point your money starts to work for you rather than you work for your money. That's also an aspect of being self-employed. I love photography. I want to be a photographer. That's easy to say, very, very hard to do. And you just really got to bear down and be tough and just trust your instincts, do the hard work, and it's always going to be hard work. It's hardly ever easy. And I think a lot of people underestimate the challenge to get up into that level where you're providing a lifestyle for you and a family. Thinking about what you want to do and wanting to do it and doing the work to get there, the gap is a lot bigger, I think, than most people think it is.
Indeed. Well, Michael, thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting. I've loved learning a lot more about time-lapse photography than I ever thought possible here. It's been a great chat, and I'm sure that people listening to this have learned a great deal as well. I just want to thank you for taking the time out to be on here with us today.
Well, thank you, Nigel. You and I go back a long way, and I really appreciate all the help you've given me. In fact, my two biggest clients in time-lapse right now came in through online Google search. And if I hadn't been listening to your advice over the years about SEO, those jobs never would have found me. I'm living proof of what you advocate and how important it is, because it does work. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate that. Well, hopefully we'll have you on again another time.
Oh, I have a lot more to say, so you let me know. I'm always around.
All right. Well, thanks again, Michael, and you have a great day, okay?
Thank you, Nigel. Take care.